The Dubai night sparkled with artificial stars as Khalid Al Fayyad's private helicopter landed on top of his skyscraper. At 45, he was more handsome than ever, his black hair touched with silver at the temples, his face carved from years of ruthless business deals. The media called him the king of oil, but tonight he wasn't thinking about business. Tonight was about revenge. "The auction starts in 2 hours, sir," his assistant, James, reminded him as they walked into the penthouse office. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself? We could send someone else." Khalid didn't answer. He never explained himself to anyone. Instead, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at his empire. Everything the light touched belonged to him: hotels, shopping centers, oil refineries, but none of it filled the emptiness inside him. "The Chen family won't know what hit them," James continued, pulling up documents on his tablet. "Once we expose their illegal auctions, their entire operation will crumble." Khalid smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The Chens had crossed him in a business deal 5 years ago, thinking they could cheat the great Khalid Al Fayyad. Tonight he would begin their downfall. "Get the car ready," he ordered, adjusting his custom-made suit. "And make sure our people are in position." The underground auction was held in an old palace outside the city. As Khalid's Rolls-Royce pulled up, he could see other wealthy men arriving. Oil sheikhs, European aristocrats, Russian oligarchs. All of them here to bid on things that shouldn't be for sale. "Your invitation, sir?" a guard asked at the entrance. Khalid handed over the gold-embossed card he'd paid a fortune to obtain. The guard bowed deeply when he saw the name. Inside, the palace was a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. Khalid accepted a glass but didn't drink. He needed his mind sharp tonight. "Mr. Al Fayyad," Mrs. Chen herself appeared at his elbow, her silk dress rustling. "What an unexpected pleasure. We don't often see you at our little gatherings." "I was intrigued by tonight's offerings," he replied smoothly. If she was nervous about his presence, she didn't show it. "Then please take your seat. We're about to begin." Khalid sat in the front row, his face betraying nothing as items were brought out and sold. Art stolen from museums, exotic animals, ancient artifacts. He recorded everything with a tiny camera in his watch, building evidence against the Chens. Then the auctioneer announced, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our special collection." Khalid's hand tightened on his armrest. This was what he'd come for. Proof they were trafficking humans. The first few women were brought out, faces covered with sheer veils, eyes downcast. Khalid felt sick, but he kept his face neutral. Soon he would free them all and destroy everyone involved in this evil trade. And now, our crown jewel of the evening. A woman in white stepped onto the stage. Even through the veil, Khalid could see she held herself differently, proud, unbroken. Then she turned and his world stopped spinning. Those eyes, he would know those eyes anywhere. Eyes that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. Layla. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. People turned to stare, but Khalid couldn't move, couldn't breathe. How was this possible? Layla had vanished without a trace. He'd searched for months, hired the best private investigators money could buy. They'd found nothing. But there was something else, something that made his heart stop completely. Clutching Layla's hand was a small boy, no more than 6 years old, a boy with Khalid's own eyes, staring out at the crowd. The world turned red. Khalid surged to his feet, his carefully laid plans forgotten. "Stop this auction immediately," he roared. Mrs. Chen rushed forward. "Mr. Al Fayyad, please, I'll buy them both. Name your price." His voice was thunder in the suddenly silent room. "Sir, that's not how—" Khalid pulled out his phone. $1 billion. Transferred to your account right now. But if you don't accept, I will burn your entire organization to the ground." The boy pressed closer to Layla's side. She stood frozen, those familiar eyes wide with fear and something else. Hatred. Mrs. Chen licked her lips. Greed. Winning over caution. "The transfer first." Khalid's fingers flew over his phone. A moment later, Mrs. Chen's own phone chimed. "Sold," she said quickly. "Guards, please escort." "No one touches them," Khalid snarled. He strode onto the stage himself, his eyes never leaving Layla's. Up close, he could see the changes 7 years had wrought. She was still beautiful, but harder now. A fighter's spirit burned in those eyes. "Layla," he whispered. She lifted her chin. "Hello, Khalid." Her voice was exactly as he remembered. The boy looked between them, confused and frightened. Khalid's heart clenched as he saw his own features reflected in that small face. "Come," he said softly. "My car is waiting. We're not going anywhere with you." Layla's voice could have frozen the desert. "Please," he said, letting his mask crack just slightly. "Let me help you, both of you. Then you can tell me why you disappeared, why you never told me about—" He looked at the boy, unable to say the words. For a long moment, Layla just stared at him. Then she squeezed the boy's hand. "It's okay, Zain. We're leaving with this man." "Zain?" His son's name was Zain. Khalid led them out of the palace past the staring crowd. His security team materialized around them. In the car, Layla sat as far from him as possible. Zain huddled against her side. "Take us to the penthouse," Khalid ordered his driver. Then he looked at the woman he'd loved and lost, the son he'd never known existed. "You're safe now, both of you, and when you're ready, we have much to discuss." Layla's eyes met his in the darkness. "You have no idea what you've walked into, Khalid. No idea at all." The Rolls-Royce glided through the neon-lit streets of Dubai, carrying its passengers toward a confrontation 7 years in the making. In the back seat, Khalid watched his newfound son drift off to sleep against his mother's shoulder and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. But Layla's words echoed in his mind. What didn't he know? What forces had torn them apart 7 years ago? And why had she ended up on that auction block with their child? One thing was certain: he would have his answers, and anyone who had hurt his family would pay dearly for it. The elevator ride to Khalid's penthouse was silent, except for Zain's soft breathing. The boy had fallen completely asleep, his small head resting in Layla's lap. Khalid couldn't stop staring at him. His son. The word felt foreign in his mind, like a dream he couldn't quite believe. "He looks just like you," Layla said quietly, surprising him. They were her first words since leaving the auction house. "Why didn't you tell me?" Khalid's voice was rough with emotion. 7 years, Layla. 7 years I searched for you." "Not here," she whispered, glancing at the sleeping child. Not in front of him. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the glittering Dubai skyline, but Khalid barely noticed the view he'd seen 1,000 times before. His entire world had narrowed to the woman and child before him. "There's a guest room down the hall," he said. "You can put him to bed there." Layla hesitated, then nodded. Khalid watched as she gently lifted Zain, the boy instinctively wrapping his arms around her neck. His heart ached at the sight. "I'll have someone bring you both clean clothes," he called after her. She didn't respond. While she was gone, Khalid poured himself a drink. His hands were shaking. In all his years of business deals and power plays, nothing had ever rattled him like this. He'd gone to that auction house expecting to gather evidence against the Chens. Instead, he'd found the missing piece of his soul and a son he never knew existed. Layla returned 15 minutes later. She'd removed her shoes, and her feet were silent on the marble floor. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, but her eyes were still fierce. "He's asleep," she said. "He's good at sleeping through anything. He's had to be." The implications of that statement made Khalid's blood boil. "What happened to you, Layla? Where have you been all these years?" She walked to the windows, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's a long story, Khalid, and not a pretty one. I have all night." She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw shadows of things he didn't want to imagine. "Do you remember Marcus Chen?" Khalid frowned. "Mrs. Chen's son? The one who died in that boating accident 6 years ago." "He didn't die in an accident." Layla's voice was flat. "I killed him." The crystal glass slipped from Khalid's fingers, shattering on the floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. "He was obsessed with me," Layla continued, her voice distant. "Had been since that charity gala where we met him. When he found out I was pregnant with your child, he went crazy. Said no woman had ever turned him down before. Said he'd destroy you if I didn't leave you. You should have come to me, Khalid said, his voice tight with rage. I would have protected you. He had proof that your companies were breaking international sanctions. Fake proof, but convincing enough. He said he'd release it to the media, destroy everything you'd built. She laughed bitterly. I was young and scared. I thought I was protecting you and our baby. So you ran. I ran, changed my name, moved from city to city. But Marcus found us when Zane was 3 months old. Her hands clenched into fists. He said if I didn't become his possession, he'd kill the baby. Said no one would ever find the body. Khalid felt sick. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but the distance between them was more than physical. I agreed to his demands, Layla said. For 3 years, I lived in his shadow. Watched my son grow up calling another man uncle, while that monster plotted to turn him against you someday. But then, she closed her eyes. Then he got drunk one night, said he was tired of waiting, said it was time to get rid of the baby and make one of our own. What happened? Khalid's voice was barely a whisper. We were on his yacht. He came at me with a knife. We struggled. He fell and hit his head on the railing. When he went overboard, she opened her eyes and they were cold as desert nights. I didn't call for help. I watched him drown. Silence filled the penthouse. In the distance, car horns honked and sirens wailed, but up here it felt like they were in another world entirely. His mother knew, Layla said finally. Not the whole truth, but she knew I was involved somehow. She's been hunting me ever since. Every time I thought we were safe, her people would find us. I've spent 3 years running, keeping Zane one step ahead of her revenge, until tonight. Khalid's mind was racing, putting pieces together, until she finally caught you. Yes, Layla's shoulders slumped. Now you know everything. And you're in danger too, Khalid. Mrs. Chen won't stop until she destroys everyone connected to her son's death. Khalid crossed the room in 3 long strides. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. Her skin was cool under his fingers as he tilted her chin up. Listen to me, he said fiercely. You did what you had to do to protect our son. Everything else, my reputation, my companies, none of it matters. I lost you once because I didn't know you needed protection. I won't lose you again. Tears filled her eyes. Khalid. No more running, he said. No more hiding, you and Zain are under my protection now, and I'm going to make sure Helena Chen never threatens another person again. How? Layla whispered. She has powerful friends, connections everywhere. Khalid smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So do I, and unlike her, I have nothing left to lose. She took 7 years from me. 7 years I could have watched my son grow up. 7 years I could have loved you, protected you both. A sound from the hallway made them both turn. Zain stood there in his oversized borrowed t-shirt, rubbing his eyes. Mama, he said uncertainly. Where are we? Layla pulled away from Khalid and went to their son. We're safe, Habibi. This is... She glanced at Khalid, uncertainty in her eyes. Khalid's heart clenched as he looked at the boy, his boy, standing there looking lost and confused. Everything in him wanted to gather his son in his arms, to make up for all the lost years, but he knew he had to be patient. I'm an old friend of your mother's, he said gently. My name is Khalid. Would you like something to eat? I can have the chef make anything you want. Zain's eyes lit up slightly. Anything. Anything at all. Can I have pancakes, even though it's nighttime? Khalid laughed, and for the first time in 7 years, it felt real. Especially because it's nighttime. As he watched Layla lead their son to the kitchen, Khalid's mind was already working. He had calls to make, plans to set in motion. Helena Chen would learn what it meant to truly face his wrath. But for now, for this moment, he would sit with his newfound family and eat pancakes at midnight. The rest of the world could wait until morning. Morning came too quickly to the penthouse. Khalid hadn't slept, spending the night making calls and setting plans in motion. Every few hours, he'd check on Layla and Zain just to make sure they were really there, that it hadn't all been a dream. The sun was barely rising when his private elevator dinged. James walked in carrying a thick folder. Everything you asked for, sir, he said, looking exhausted, but you're not going to like it. Khalid took the folder and started reading. His face grew darker with each page. "Are you sure about this?" "Triple-checked. Everything myself." James loosened his tie. "Helena Chen has connections to at least 3 different intelligence agencies. She's been using them to track Layla all these years. That's how she always found her. And the auction house? A trap. She knew you were investigating her family's business. She arranged for Layla to be there, knowing you'd show up eventually." James hesitated. "Sir, there's more. About your brother." Khalid's head snapped up. "What about Karim? He's been working with Mrs. Chen for years, ever since Layla disappeared." James pulled out another document. "He's the one who helped create those fake papers about your company breaking sanctions. The ones she used to threaten Layla." The paper crumpled in Khalid's fist. "His own brother. The same brother who had comforted him when Layla vanished, who had helped him search for her. Why?" he demanded. "Money, mostly. The Chens paid him well. But also..." James looked uncomfortable. "He was in love with Layla too. Had been since you first started dating her. When Mrs. Chen approached him about helping get rid of her, he agreed. He thought with Layla gone, eventually you'd move on and he'd have a chance." A noise from the doorway made them both turn. Layla stood there, in borrowed clothes, her face pale. "I knew it," she whispered. "I saw him sometimes, watching me, following me. But I thought I was being paranoid." Khalid crossed the room to her. "Did he ever?" "No," she said quickly. "He never came close, just watched from a distance. I think he couldn't bring himself to actually hurt me, but he made sure Mrs. Chen's people always knew where to find us." Zane wandered in then, still in his pajamas, and the adults quickly stopped talking. The boy looked around the huge living room with wide eyes. "Mama, can I watch TV? This one's bigger than our whole apartment." Layla managed to smile. "After breakfast, Habibi. Why don't you go wash up first?" Once Zain was out of earshot, Khalid turned to James. "I want security doubled. No one gets in or out of this building without my personal approval. And find Karim. I want to know exactly where my dear brother is right now." "Already on it, sir. But there's something else you should see first." James pulled up a video on his tablet. It showed Helena Chen talking to someone in what looked like an office. The timestamp was from just a few hours ago. "I don't care what it takes," Mrs. Chen was saying. "I want them both dead by sunset, the woman and the child. Make it look like an accident. Mr. Al-Fayyad's grief will be our perfect revenge." Layla's hand flew to her mouth. Khalid's face turned to stone. "Where was this taken?" he asked quietly. "Her private office at the Chen Tower. Our person inside got it to us an hour ago." James looked worried. "Sir, she's not wasting any time. She has people inside this building already. The maintenance crew that arrived this morning, all her people. Get them out, now." Khalid was already moving, pulling out his phone. "And call the plane. Have it ready in 30 minutes. "Where are we going?" Layla asked, following him as he strode toward the bedrooms. "My private island. It's the only place I can guarantee your safety while I deal with this." He stopped and took her hands. "Do you trust me?" She looked into his eyes for a long moment. "I trust you with Zane's life. That's more than I trust anyone with." "Then get him ready. Pack." "Nothing. We'll buy whatever you need when we get there." He squeezed her hands. "I won't let them hurt either of you. Not ever again." While Layla went to get Zane, Khalid made one more call. When a sleepy voice answered, his tone was pure ice. "Hello? Brother, we need to talk." Karim's voice instantly became alert. "Khalid, what's wrong?" "I know everything. About you and the Chens. About what you did to Layla." Khalid heard his brother's sharp intake of breath. "If you want to live to see tomorrow, you'll meet me at the office in 1 hour." "Brother, please let me explain." Khalid hung up. His hand was shaking with rage as he put the phone away. Zane came running out then, excited about the idea of going on a plane. The boy's innocent enthusiasm cut through Khalid's dark thoughts. This was what mattered now, keeping his son safe, protecting the family he'd just found. The private elevator opened again, and Khalid's head of security stepped out with 6 heavily armed men. "The building is clear, sir," he reported. Mrs. Chen's people have been removed. Some tried to resist. They're being questioned now. Good, get us to the airport, different route than usual. And Jakob, Khalid's voice hardened. If anyone tries to stop us, don't hesitate. They moved quickly through the private garage, surrounded by guards. Khalid helped Zayn into the armored SUV, watching as the boy's eyes grew wide at all the activity around them. Are you a spy? Zayn whispered to him. Like in the movies. Despite everything, Khalid had to smile. No, not a spy. Just someone who wants to keep you and your mother safe. As they drove through the morning traffic, Khalid's phone buzzed with a message from James. Karim just entered the Chen Tower. He's with her now. Khalid's jaw clenched, so his brother had made his choice very well. When this was over, there would be nothing left of the Chen's empire, or of the brother who had betrayed him. The Dubai sun was rising higher, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. But Khalid knew darkness was coming. A storm was gathering, one that would shake the foundations of power in this glittering city. And at the heart of it all was the sleeping boy beside him, his head resting trustingly on his mother's shoulder. Khalid's son, the heir he'd never known he had. For them, he would burn the world down if he had to, but first they had to reach the safety of his island. After that, the real war would begin. The private jet soared above the clouds, leaving Dubai's glittering towers far behind. Zayn pressed his face against the window, amazed by the view. He'd never been on a plane before, and everything about it thrilled him, from the leather seats bigger than his old bed to the flight attendant who kept bringing him chocolate milk. Layla sat across from Khalid, watching their son with tired eyes. Neither of them had slept, too wound up with the morning's revelations and escape. He's taking it all so well, she said softly. He's always been like that, adapting to whatever life throws at us. But sometimes I wonder what it's doing to him. All this running. The running stops now, Khalid promised. He looked at his son, still marveling at how much the boy looked like him at that age. The island is completely secure. My most trusted people staff it. No one gets in or out without going through multiple checkpoints. And what about you? Layla asked. You're not staying, are you? Before Khalid could answer, his phone buzzed. The message from James made his blood run cold. Karim found dead in Chen Tower parking garage. Single gunshot. Police already calling it suicide. What is it? Layla asked, seeing his expression change. My brother is dead. Khalid's voice was flat. Helena Chen is tying up loose ends. Layla's hand flew to her mouth. Oh God, do you think he really... No, this was her. She's sending me a message. Khalid's fingers tightened on the phone. She's showing me what happens to people who betray her. Mr. Khalid. Zayn's voice interrupted them. He'd finally turned away from the window. Are we really going to an island, like pirates? Khalid forced himself to smile. Even better than pirates. This island has everything, a private beach, horses, a pool bigger than most houses. Zayn's eyes lit up. Can you teach me to swim? Mama never had time to learn, so she couldn't teach me. The innocent request hit Khalid like a punch to the gut. So many simple things his son had missed out on because of the Chen's vendetta. Of course I'll teach you, he said. We'll have all the time in the world. The boy beamed and went back to looking out the window. Layla's eyes met Khalid's, filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. You can't go back, she said quietly. Helena will be waiting for you. She'll kill you too. She'll try. Khalid's voice was steel. But first, I need to get you both safely. Settled? Then I'm going to dismantle everything she's built piece by piece. The flight lasted another 3 hours. Zayn finally fell asleep, curled up in one of the big chairs. Layla tucked a blanket around him while Khalid watched, his heart aching at the simple domestic scene. He asks about his father sometimes, Layla said suddenly, still looking at their sleeping son. I never knew what to tell him. How do you explain to a child that his father is one of the most powerful men in the Middle East? That you left to protect him? What did you tell him? That his father was a good man who would have loved him very much if he'd known about him. She finally looked at Khalid. Was I wrong? Khalid stood and crossed to her side of the plane. Carefully, he took her hands in his. You were right about one thing. I would have loved him. I do love him, even though I've only known him for a day. But you were wrong about leaving. I would have protected you both. We could have faced Helena together. I was young and scared, Layla whispered. When Marcus showed me those documents about your company, talked about destroying everything you'd built, I thought I was being noble, sacrificing my happiness for yours. There is no happiness without you, Khalid said simply. These past 7 years I've built more wealth, gained more power, but I've been empty inside. Finding you again, discovering I have a son, it's like color returning to a gray world. Tears filled Layla's eyes. Khalid. The plane intercom crackled. Sir, we're beginning our descent to the island. Through the windows they could see it, a private paradise rising from the turquoise sea. White sand beaches curved around lush gardens and elegant buildings. A massive villa crowned the highest point, overlooking everything. Zain woke up as they landed, rushing to the window again. It's like a fairy tale, he exclaimed. Welcome home, Khalid said softly, and he wasn't just talking to his son. The island. Staff was waiting as they descended the plane steps. Khalid had radioed ahead and everything was ready. Clothes in their sizes, rooms prepared, security in place. Miss Sarah will show you to your rooms, Khalid said as they entered the villa. You can rest, get cleaned up, everything you need should be there. You're leaving, aren't you? Layla asked. Just for a few days. I need to deal with Helena before she can hurt anyone else. He knelt down to Zain's level. Can you be the man of the house while I'm gone? Take care of your mother for me. Zain nodded solemnly. Will you come back? Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Khalid ruffled the boy's hair, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. And when I get back, we'll start those swimming lessons. As the staff led them away, Layla looked back one last time. The fear in her eyes nearly broke his resolve. Promise. Hami, you'll be careful, she said. Promise me you'll come back to us. I promise. Khalid's voice was firm. And this time, I'll never leave either of you again. He waited until they were out of sight before letting his mask slip. Rage and grief warred on his face as he pulled out his phone. James, start it now. Leak everything we have on the Chens to every major news outlet and get me a meeting with the Minister of Justice. It's time Helena Chen learned what real power looks like. The sun was setting over the island as Khalid's plane took off again. In the villa, Zain stood at his window, watching it disappear into the clouds. Layla came up behind him, wrapping her arms around her son. Is he really coming back? Zain asked. Layla looked at the darkening sky, remembering the fierce love she'd seen in Khalid's eyes when he looked at their son. Yes, Habibi. Your father always keeps his promises. In Dubai, storm clouds were gathering, but here on the island, for the first time in 7 years, Layla felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. The Dubai business world woke up to chaos. Every major news channel was running the same headlines. Chen family empire built on criminal enterprise. Human trafficking. Ring exposed. International investigation launched into Chen Holdings. In her penthouse office, Helena Chen watched her empire crumbling on multiple TV screens. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the leather of her chair as her phone rang constantly with panicked calls from partners and clients. Find him, she snarled into her phone. Find Khalid Al-Fayyad and bring him to me, alive. But Khalid was already 3 steps ahead. As Helena's world collapsed around her, he sat in a secret meeting with the Minister of Justice, laying out evidence that had taken his team years to compile. This goes beyond the illegal auctions, Khalid explained, sliding another folder across the desk. Tax fraud, money laundering, connections to terrorist organizations. The Chens have been corrupting our country for decades. The minister leafed through the documents, his face growing darker with each page. Why are you bringing this to me now? Because she killed my brother. Khalid's voice was ice. And she's threatening my family. The woman and child you took from the auction. The minister raised an eyebrow. My sources tell me there's more to that story. The woman is Layla Rahman. She disappeared 7 years ago after being threatened by Helena's son, Marcus Chen. Khalid paused. The boy is my son. I only discovered his existence yesterday. Understanding dawned on the minister's face. So this is personal. Everything about this is personal. Khalid leaned forward. But it's also about justice. Helena Chen has destroyed countless lives. How many other families has she torn apart? How many other children has she trafficked? Before the minister could respond, Khalid's phone buzzed. The message from James made his blood freeze. Chen's mercenaries tracked the plane. They know about the island. Khalid was on his feet instantly. I need to go. You have everything you need to bring her down legally. Do it fast before she can hide any more evidence. Where are you going? To protect my family. Meanwhile, on the island, Layla was watching Zayn play in the garden. The boy had never had so much space to run, so many beautiful things to explore. For the first time in years, she saw him acting like a normal child, not having to look over his shoulder constantly. Sarah, the housekeeper, brought her a cup of tea. He's a wonderful boy, the older woman said kindly. He has his father's smile. Layla looked at her in surprise. You knew Khalid when he was young? I helped raise him, and his brother after their mother died. Sarah's eyes were sad. Such different boys they were. Khalid was always so serious, so responsible. Karim was the dreamer, always wanting what his brother had. And now Karim is dead. Layla's hands trembled around her teacup. Yes. Sarah touched her shoulder gently. But you and the boy are safe here. Mr. Khalid has made sure of that. A sudden commotion from the security station caught their attention. Guards were running, speaking urgently into their radios. The chief of security, a man named Victor, came striding toward them. Mrs. Rahman, we need to get you and the boy inside now. His voice was professional but tense. What's wrong? Layla's heart started racing. We've detected 3 unmarked boats approaching the island. They're not responding to our warnings. Layla's teacup crashed to the ground. Zayn! She called out. Zayn, come here right now. The boy looked up from where he was playing with a garden hose, surprised by her tone. He ran to her immediately, sensing her fear. What's happening, Mama? We're going to play a game, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Like hide and seek, but inside the house. Okay? Victor was already leading them toward the villa. We have a safe room in the basement. No one can get in unless they know the codes. You'll be secure there until Mr. Al-Fayed arrives. He's coming? Layla asked hopefully. He's already in the air, 20 minutes out. Victor touched his earpiece, listening to reports. But these boats will reach us in 10. They hurried through the villa's marble halls downstairs. Layla hadn't even noticed before. The safe room was like a luxury bunker. Comfortable furniture, screens showing security feeds from around the island, enough supplies for weeks. Don't open this door for anyone except Mr. Al-Fayed or myself, Victor instructed. No matter what you hear, no matter who it is, understand? Layla nodded, holding Zayn close. The boy was trembling slightly, picking up on the adult's tension. Mama, I'm scared. Don't be, Habibi. She stroked his hair. Your father is coming. He'll protect us. The heavy door sealed with a hiss, leaving them alone in the secure room. On the screens, Layla could see the guards taking up defensive positions around the villa. The boats were clearly visible now, cutting through the turquoise water with deadly purpose. Please hurry, Khalid, she whispered. In his private jet, Khalid was pushing the engines to their limits. His pilot had never seen him so intense, so focused. Sir, James's voice came through the satellite phone. Helena Chen just left her office with a private security team. Our people lost her in traffic. She's coming herself, Khalid realized. She wants to oversee this personally. The Minister of Justice has issued the arrest warrants. Police are moving on all Chen properties now, but they'll be too late to stop this. Khalid watched the island growing larger in the distance. How many men on those boats? Thermal imaging shows at least 15 heavily armed mercenaries, ex-military, probably Russian or Eastern European. Khalid's jaw clenched. And our security force on the island? 10 men. But they're well trained, and they have the home advantage. Below them, the first shots were being fired. The mercenaries had landed on the beach and were engaging with the island's security teams. Through his binoculars, Khalid could see another boat approaching from the other side, sleeker, more expensive, Helena's personal yacht. Circle back, he ordered the pilot. I'm going to have to drop in. James's voice was alarmed. Sir, that's too dangerous. The wind's alone. My son is down there, Khalid cut him off. My son and the woman I love. I'm not losing them again. In the safe room, Layla watched the screens in horror as the gunfight intensified. Zayn had fallen asleep on her lap, exhausted. From fear and excitement, she stroked his face, remembering how just that morning he'd been so happy, so carefree. "Your father's coming," she whispered again, as much to reassure herself as him. He promised. Above the island, Khalid prepared for the most important fight of his life. Helena Chen had taken 7 years from him. She'd killed his brother. Now she was trying to take his family again. This time he would make sure she failed, no matter the cost. The island had become a war zone. Gunfire echoed across the once peaceful paradise as Helena Chen's mercenaries pushed toward the villa. The security team held their ground, but they were outnumbered and being forced to retreat. In the safe room, Layla watched it all unfold on the security screens. Zain was still asleep, thank God, but she knew it couldn't last. Each explosion, each burst of gunfire made her jump. "Come on, Khalid," she whispered, scanning the screens for any sign of him. "Where are you?" Above the island, Khalid's pilot was making another pass. The wind was terrible, making the small jet bounce in the air. "Sir, this is insane," the pilot shouted over the engines. "The drop zone is too hot. There's active gunfire down there. Just get me as close as you can." Khalid checked his parachute one last time. He'd never done anything like this before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. James's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Helena's yacht is almost at the dock. Police helicopters are 15 minutes out, but she'll be inside the villa before then. Make sure they know she's to be taken alive," Khalid ordered. "I want her to face justice for everything she's done." The pilot's voice was tense. "Drop zone in 30 seconds. God help you, sir." Khalid took a deep breath and opened the door. The wind hit him like a physical force. Far below, he could see the firefight spreading across his beautiful island. The gardens were burning, smoke rising in thick black columns. "Now!" the pilot shouted. Khalid jumped. The free fall was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. The wind roared in his ears as he plummeted toward the earth. At the last possible moment, he pulled his chute, feeling the jerk as it deployed. He landed hard on the villa's roof, rolling to absorb the impact. Immediately, he unclipped the parachute and drew his gun. The roof access door was locked, but he had the codes to everything on the island. Inside the villa, Helena Chen was already moving through the marble halls with her personal guards. She was dressed all in black, her silver hair pulled back severely from her face. "Find them," she ordered. "Tear this place apart if you have to." Victor, the head of security, was coordinating the defense from a hidden command center. When he saw Khalid on the internal cameras, he immediately radioed his men. "The boss is in the building. Protect his path to the safe room at all costs." Khalid moved quickly through the upper floors, hearing gunfire below. He knew every inch of this villa, every secret passage and hidden door. Helena's men were good, but they were fighting on his territory. In the safe room, Layla suddenly sat up straighter. On one of the screens, she'd caught a glimpse of Khalid moving through the villa. "He's here," she breathed. Relief and fear warred in her chest. He'd come for them, just as he promised. But now he was in terrible danger. A massive explosion rocked the building. On the screens, Layla saw that Helena's men had blown open the main security doors. They were inside the villa now, moving with military precision. Zain woke up with a cry. "Mama, what's happening?" "Shh, Habibi." She held him close. "Remember what I said, your father is coming. We just have to be very quiet and brave." The boy nodded, his small face serious. "Like spies?" "Just like spies." She forced a smile, trying to make it seem like a game rather than a nightmare. Khalid had made it down to the second floor when he ran into the first of Helena's men. The firefight was brief but intense. His security training paid off, 2 mercenaries down, but now his position was compromised. "He's here," he heard them shouting. "Second floor, east wing." He ducked into a hidden alcove just as more men came, running. Years of living in dangerous parts of the world had taught him how to handle himself in combat, but he was still outnumbered. His earpiece crackled. "Sir," Victor's voice was urgent, "Mrs. Chen is heading for the basement. She must know about the safe room." Khalid's blood ran cold. He had to get there first. In the command center, Victor watched helplessly as his men were overwhelmed one by one. He'd served Khalid for 10 years, seen him build this island paradise. Now it was all burning. Making a decision, he grabbed his rifle. "All units fall back to the safe room," he ordered. "Protection of the family is priority one." Helena Chen moved through the chaos like a ghost, her face a mask of cold fury. She'd lost everything today, her empire, her reputation, her power. But she would have her revenge. "Mrs. Chen," one of her men called out. "We found the entrance to the basement." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Excellent. Breach it." In the safe room, Layla could hear explosions getting closer. Zane was crying quietly now, trying to be brave but terrified by the noise. "Mama, why are they trying to hurt us? They're bad people, Habibi, but your father won't let them." She prayed she was right. Suddenly all the screens went dark. The power had been cut. Emergency lights came on, bathing the safe room in an eerie red glow. "Clever," Helena's voice came through the door's intercom. "Very clever, Layla. Hiding here with Khalid's little bastard, but it's over now." Layla covered Zane's ears. "I can't get in here, Helena. This door is reinforced steel." "True, but we brought enough explosives to crack it like an egg. Unless what? Come out now, just you and the boy, and I'll make it quick. Stay in there and I'll make you both suffer before the end." Layla looked at her son's frightened face. For 7 years she'd kept him safe. She'd run, hidden, changed their names countless times, but now they were trapped. "I'll give you 1 minute to decide," Helena said. After that, the intercom cut, off with a burst of static. Then another voice came through, Khalid's voice. "Get away from my family, Helena." Gunfire erupted in the hallway outside. Layla pulled Zane behind the heavy desk, covering him with her body as the sounds of combat filled the air. "Your father's here," she whispered. "Everything's going to be okay now." But in her heart, she knew the real fight was just beginning. And this time, there would be nowhere left to run. The hallway outside the safe room had become a battlefield. Khalid and Victor fought side by side against Helena's mercenaries, using overturned furniture as cover. The emergency lights cast everything in a bloody red glow, making it hard to tell friend from foe. "Like old times, Asa," Victor shouted over the gunfire. He'd served with Khalid in Afghanistan before either of them had gotten into private security. "Less talking, more shooting," Khalid replied, but there was a grim smile on his face. Helena Chen had retreated behind her men, but her voice carried over the chaos. "You're only delaying the inevitable, Khalid. I've lost everything because of you. The least you can do is die with your little family. The only one dying today is you, Helena." He turned to Victor. "Cover me." Victor laid down suppressing fire while Khalid moved forward, taking out 2 mercenaries with precise shots. He was getting closer to Helena's position when something rolled across the floor between them. "Grenade!" Victor shouted. Khalid dove behind a marble column just as the explosion rocked the hallway. When the smoke cleared, he saw Victor lying motionless, blood pooling around him. "No!" The sight of his old friend dying sent rage coursing through him. He broke cover, firing rapidly, taking down more of Helena's men. Inside the safe room, Layla held Zane tight as the walls shook with each explosion. The boy had stopped crying, but his small body trembled with each boom. "Mama," he whispered, "is Papa fighting the bad people?" The simple question made Layla's heart clench. In just 2 days, Zion had gone from never knowing his father to calling him Papa. "Yes, Habibi. He's fighting to protect us." "Is he going to die?" "No," Layla said firmly, even as tears filled her eyes. "Your father is the strongest man I know. He's going to save us." Outside, the gunfire had died down. Most of Helena's mercenaries were dead or wounded, but Helena herself was still out there, and she had one last card to play. "Khalid," she called out, "I have something to show you before this ends." He heard the click of high heels on marble, then Helena stepped into view. In her hand was an old phone, one he recognized. "Remember this? It belonged to my son Marcus. I found it in his yacht after he died. Would you like to know what's on it?" Khalid kept his gun trained on her. "More of your lies? Oh no, truth is so much more painful." She pressed play on the phone, and a familiar voice filled the hallway. "I can't keep doing this, Marcus." It was Karim's voice from 7 years ago. "She's my brother's fiancée." "And you're in love with her," Marcus replied. "I'm offering you a chance. Help me get rid of her, and eventually Khalid will move on. Then she'll be free for you. She'll..." never love me, she only sees Khalid. Then we'll make her disappear. I have the fake documents ready, proof his company is breaking sanctions. Once she sees them, she'll run to protect him, and you'll be there to comfort your brother in his time of need. The recording ended. Helena's smile was victorious. Your own brother helped plan it all, Khalid. He loved Layla so much he was willing to destroy her life and yours just to have a chance with her. Khalid's hand tightened on his gun, and then you killed him to keep him quiet. He became a liability, just like you and your precious little family. Quick as a snake, she pulled out a gun of her own. Shall we end this? But before either could, fire! A new voice rang out. Police, drop your weapons! The hallway suddenly filled with armed officers. Police helicopters could be heard outside, their searchlights sweeping through the windows. Helena's face contorted with rage. With nothing left to lose, she swung her gun toward the safe room door. If I'm going down, I'm taking them with me. Khalid didn't hesitate. His shot caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around. Her gun went off, the bullet hitting the ceiling as she fell. It's over, Helena, he said, watching as the police swarmed in to arrest her. You've lost everything, she laughed through the pain as they handcuffed her. Have I? Ask yourself this, Khalid. How many other secrets did Karim take to his grave? How many other betrayals are waiting to be discovered? The police led her away, but her words hung in the air like poison. Khalid turned to the safe room door, entering the code with shaking hands. When it opened, Layla stood there with Zayn in her arms. Is it over? She whispered. He pulled them both into his embrace, feeling his son's small arms wrap around his neck. It's over. You're safe now, both of you. But even as he held his family, Helena's final words echoed in his mind. What other secrets had his brother kept? What other dangers might be lurking in the shadows of the past? For now, though, none of that mattered. His son was safe. Layla was back in his arms. The woman who had threatened them was going to prison. Papa? Zayn's voice was small but steady. Did you beat the bad guys? Khalid smiled, his first real smile in what felt like years. Yes, Habibi. The bad guys are gone. Can we go swimming now? You promised to teach me. The simple request, so innocent after all the violence, made both Khalid and Layla laugh through their tears. Tomorrow, Khalid promised. We'll start tomorrow. We have all the time in the world now. As police and medical teams swarmed the island, Khalid held his family close. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The gardens were burned, the villa damaged, but none of that mattered. Sometimes, he realized, you had to walk through fire to find your way home. And finally, after 7 long years, he was home. Dawn broke over the island, revealing the full extent of the previous night's battle. Police teams were still combing through the wreckage, collecting evidence. The once beautiful gardens were scarred with bullet holes and burn marks, but already Khalid's staff was beginning the work of restoration. In the villa's kitchen, Layla watched as Zayn devoured a plate of pancakes. The boy seemed remarkably resilient, already treating the previous night's terror like an exciting adventure story. And then Papa shot the bad lady, he told Sarah, who was cooking more pancakes. Just like in the movies. Less talking, more eating, Layla said gently, but she couldn't help smiling. Children were amazing in their ability to bounce back from trauma. Khalid entered the kitchen, looking exhausted but determined. He'd spent most of the night dealing with police statements and coordinating with his security team. Now, finally, he could be with his family. Papa! Zayn jumped up from his chair. Can we go swimming today? You promised. First, we need to talk. Khalid sat down at the table, pulling Zayn onto his lap. What happened yesterday was very scary, wasn't it? The boy nodded, his excitement fading a little. I tried to be brave. Like you. You were very brave, both you and your mother. Khalid looked at Layla, who was watching them with tears in her eyes. But I need you to understand something. Those bad people, they're gone now, and they're never coming back. You're safe here, both of you. Promise? Zayn asked. I promise. Khalid hugged his son close. And there's something else we need to talk about, something very important. Layla sat down beside them, sensing what was coming. Zayn, Khalid said carefully, you know how you've been calling me Papa. The boy suddenly looked worried. Is that okay? Mama said it was okay. It's more than okay. Khalid's voice was rough with emotion. Because that's who I am. I'm your father, your real father. Zain's eyes went wide. He looked at his mother for confirmation, and when she nodded, his whole face lit up. Really? But where were you before? It was the question they'd both been dreading. How do you explain such a complicated situation to a 6-year-old? I didn't know about you, Khalid said honestly. Some bad people kept your mother and you away from me for a long time. But now I've found you, and I'm never letting you go again. Zain thought about this for a moment. Is that why the bad lady was trying to hurt us because you're my papa? Yes, Habibi, but she's gone now. She can never hurt any of us again. Good. Zain's face became very serious. Because I want to stay here with you and Mama forever. Layla reached out and took Khalid's hand. We both do. Just then, James appeared in the doorway. Sir, the Minister of Justice is on the phone. They've finished questioning Helena Chen. Khalid sighed. What did they learn? It's complicated. You'll want to hear this yourself. Go, Layla said softly. We'll be here when you're done. Khalid kissed Zain's head and squeezed Layla's hand before following James to his office. The minister was waiting on video call. Here it's worse than we thought, the minister said without preamble. Helena Chen wasn't working alone. There's an entire network of powerful people involved in her operations. How high does it go? All the way to the royal family in some countries. She's naming names, trying to bargain for a lighter sentence. Khalid's jaw clenched. And my brother? What else has she said about Karim? That's the other thing. The minister looked uncomfortable. We found documents in his apartment. It seems he was gathering evidence against the Chens for years ever. Since Layla disappeared, he was working with international authorities building a case. What? Khalid sat down hard. But the recordings, he helped them drive Layla away. Yes, at first, but it seems he regretted his actions almost immediately. Everything he did after that, staying close to the Chens, earning their trust. It was all to bring them down. He died trying to protect your family, Khalid. The news hit him like a physical blow. His brother, whom he'd thought a traitor, had spent years working in secret to make things right. There's more, the minister continued. We found a letter in his safe. It's addressed to you. Back in the kitchen, Layla was helping Zain draw pictures of their new home. The boy had already adapted to the idea of Khalid being his father, with the simple acceptance of childhood. Mama, he said, coloring carefully, since Papa is rich, can I have a horse? Layla laughed. We'll have to ask him about that. And a pool? And a playground? And one thing at a time, Habibi. She stroked his hair, marveling at how quickly their lives had changed. Just 3 days ago, they'd been hiding in a tiny apartment, always looking over their shoulders. Now they were home. Sarah brought them more juice and smiled at the domestic scene. The staff is already planning a welcome party for you both, she said. Once things settle down, of course. Things will never be completely normal, will they? Layla asked quietly. Normal is overrated, Sarah replied wisely. Love is what matters, and that little boy has more love around him now than ever before. In his office, Khalid opened his brother's letter with trembling hands. Karim's familiar handwriting filled the page. My dearest brother, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I hope I died doing something worthy at last, something to make up for my greatest sin, helping separate you from Layla and your child. I've spent 7 years trying to atone for what I did. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every Chen family secret I uncovered, it was all for you, to make things right. I know you may never forgive me, but please understand, I loved her too, not in the pure way you did, but in my own broken way. When Marcus Chen approached me with his plan, I was weak. I let my jealousy overcome my loyalty to you, but seeing what they did to her, how they hunted her and your child across the world, it destroyed me. I couldn't live with myself. Everything I've gathered is in a safe deposit box at Emirates Bank. Box 247. The key is taped to the back of this letter. Use it to finish what I started. Destroy their entire network. And when you find Layla and your child, because I know you will, tell them I'm sorry. Tell your son about his uncle who loved him even though he never met him. Most of all, be happy, brother. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Your loving brother, Karim. Khalid pressed his hands to his eyes, feeling tears slip through his fingers. All these years he'd thought his brother a traitor, when in reality Karim had given his life trying to protect them. A small knock at the door made him look up. Zayn stood there, holding a drawing. "Papa, I made this for you." Khalid quickly wiped his eyes and held out his arms. His son climbed onto his lap, proudly displaying his artwork. "It's our family," Zayn explained. "See, there's you and Mama and me and our house and the pool you're going to build me." Khalid laughed through his tears, holding his son close. Yes, there were still battles ahead. Helena Chen's network of criminals wouldn't go down without a fight. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he had everything he never knew he needed. A son's love, a woman's forgiveness, and a brother's redemption. 1 week had passed since the battle on the island. The gardens were showing signs of recovery, with new plants replacing the scorched ones. Inside the villa, the bullet holes had been patched, the broken windows replaced. But the biggest changes were happening in the hearts of its inhabitants. Khalid stood at the edge of the pool, watching as Zayn splashed in the shallow end with his new swimming instructor. The boy was fearless in the water, just as he was fearless in embracing his new life. "He's a natural," the instructor said, smiling as Zayn practiced his kicks. "He'll be swimming like a fish in no time." Khalid nodded, his throat tight with emotion. Every new skill his son learned, every milestone he witnessed, was precious to him. 7 years of memories lost, but he was determined to make up for lost time. Layla appeared beside him, wearing a modest swimsuit and a cover-up. She'd been hesitant about swimming at first, but Zayn had begged her to learn with him. "The police called again," she said softly. "They need my testimony about Marcus Chen's death." Khalid took her hand. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "I know, but I want to. It's time to stop running, stop hiding." She watched their son playing in the water. "Zayn deserves a mother who's brave. You are brave. You always have been." He turned to face her. "You protected our son for 7 years, kept him safe and happy despite everything. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done." Before she could respond, Zayn's excited voice called out, "Mama! Papa! Watch this!" They turned to see their son doing a perfect dog paddle across the pool's shallow end. His face was glowing with pride. "Well done, Habibi," Layla clapped, laughing as he splashed water in their direction. "Come in," he called. "Both of you. Teacher says families should swim together." Khalid and Layla exchanged glances, then kicked off their shoes. Soon they were all in the pool, playing and splashing like children. The sound of their laughter echoed across the gardens. Later that afternoon, James arrived with news from Dubai. The investigation into Helena Chen's network was expanding rapidly. "They've arrested 3 royal family members from neighboring countries," he reported. "Bank accounts are being frozen, properties seized. The whole house of cards is falling." "And Helena?" Khalid asked. "Still talking. She's implicated dozens of powerful people hoping to save herself. But with the evidence from Karim's safety deposit box," James shook his head, "she'll never see freedom again." Khalid nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. His brother's final gift had helped bring down an empire of corruption, but the price had been so high. "There's something else," James added hesitantly. "The reading of Karim's will is tomorrow. He left everything to Zayn." "What?" "His entire fortune, his properties, everything, in trust until Zayn turns 21. James handed over a document. "He also left this for you. It's the deed to a piece of land in the mountains, where your father used to take you both as children." Khalid took the paper with trembling hands. He remembered those summers in the mountains when he and Karim were boys, before money and power and jealousy had torn them apart. He wanted to build a home there, James continued. The plans were in his safe, a place for family gatherings, he wrote, where his nephew could grow up knowing the simple pleasures he and his brother once knew. Tears burned Khalid's eyes. Even in death, his brother was trying to make things right. In the garden, Layla was helping Zayn plant new flowers. The boy had insisted on being part of the restoration process, saying the island needed happy colors again. "Mama," he said, patting soil around a small rose bush, "can we stay here forever?" "Do you want to?" "Yes." He sat back on his heels, face serious. "I like having a real home and a papa, and Sarah makes the best pancakes, and soon I'll know how to swim, and maybe Papa will get me a horse and—" "Slow down, Habibi." Layla laughed. "One thing at a time, remember? But we are staying, right?" His voice held a hint of worry. "We don't have to run anymore." Layla pulled him into her arms, not caring about the dirt on his hands. "No more running, ever. This is our home now, promise, I promise." Khalid watched them from his office window, his heart full. The mountain property deed lay on his desk, along with preliminary plans for a family compound. A place of peace, just as Karim had envisioned. His phone buzzed with a message from the Minister of Justice. "Chen network crumbling. 20 more arrests today. Your brother's evidence was the key. He died a hero." A hero. Yes, that's what Karim was in the end. Not a traitor, not a jealous brother, but a man who had given everything to protect his family. Sarah appeared at his door with coffee. "Dinner will be ready in an hour, sir. I'm making Zain's favorite." "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." He turned to her. "You knew, didn't you, about Karim's investigation?" The old housekeeper nodded. "He made me promise not to tell you. Said it was the only way to keep you safe while he gathered evidence." "He always was stubborn," Khalid said softly. "Like his brother." Sarah smiled. "Your parents would be proud of you both." And they would. Have adored that little boy out there. In the garden, Zain had convinced Layla to help him build a small pond for fish. They were covered in mud, laughing as they dug in the earth. The sight made Khalid's chest ache with love. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from his lawyers. "Adoption papers ready. As soon as you and Ms. Rahman are married, you can legally give Zain your name." Marriage. The word made his heart skip. He hadn't asked her yet, hadn't wanted to pressure her so soon after everything they'd been through. But watching her now, seeing how naturally she fit into his life, into his heart, he touched the small box in his desk drawer. Soon. When the time was right. For now, he had his family, his home, and his brother's final gift, the chance to build something pure and good from the ashes of the past. 3 months had passed since the night that changed everything. The island was transformed, gardens blooming more beautifully than before, new security systems hidden discreetly among the flowers, and most importantly, the sound of a child's laughter filling every corner. Zain had learned to swim like a champion. Every morning he would race his father to the pool's edge, counting down like a game show host. 3, 2, 1, or go! Khalid always let him win, of course. The joy on his son's face was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. This particular morning was special. Khalid had been planning it for weeks with everyone's help. Sarah had kept Layla busy with wedding planning for Khalid's cousin, a convenient decoy for what was really coming. "Papa," Zain said as they dried off after their morning swim. "Did you remember what today is?" Khalid pretended to think hard. "Thursday?" "No," Zain giggled. "It's 3 months since we came to live with you. Sarah said we should celebrate with a special dinner." "Did she now?" Khalid winked at his son. "Well, we better get dressed then, something nice." In their wing of the villa, Layla was sorting through some old photographs. She'd finally felt strong enough to look at them. Pictures from her life before, when she and Khalid had first fallen in love. There was even one with Karim standing in the background at a charity gala, watching them dance. "He loved you both, you know." Layla turned to find Sarah in the doorway, holding a beautiful blue dress. "I know," Layla said softly. "I wish I'd understood sooner. Maybe things would have been different. Everything happens as it should." Sarah laid the dress on the bed. "Now get dressed. There's a family dinner tonight." "In this?" Layla touched the silk gown. "It's too fancy for just dinner," Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Trust me, my dear, tonight is special." Down in the gardens, workers were putting the finishing touches on what looked like a magical scene. Thousands of tiny lights twinkled in the trees. A path of rose petals led to a pavilion overlooking the sea. Musicians were setting up discreetly. Behind the flowering bushes, Khalid supervised everything while trying to keep his hands from shaking. In his pocket was a small velvet box that felt heavier than all his business empire combined. As the sun began to set, Zain led his mother down to the gardens. The boy was dressed in a perfect miniature version of his father's suit, taking his role very seriously. "Mama, you have to close your eyes," he insisted. "It's a surprise." Layla laughed but complied, letting her son guide her along the petal-strewn path. She could smell roses and jasmine, hear soft music playing. "Open them," Zain whispered. Layla opened her eyes and gasped. The garden had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Lights twinkled everywhere like stars. The pavilion was draped in flowing white fabric that moved gently in the breeze, and there in the center of it all stood Khalid. "What is all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Khalid took her hands in his. "7 years ago, I lost the love of my life. I searched the world for her, never knowing she was carrying the greatest gift anyone could give me. Our son, Zain." Beamed right on cue and presented a small velvet box to his father. "Life gave us a second chance," Khalid continued, going down on one knee. "These past 3 months have shown me that all my wealth, all my power, means nothing without you. And Zain, you are my home, my heart, my family." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the fairy lights and scattered them like diamonds. "Layla Rahman, will you marry me? Will you help me give our son the family he deserves?" Tears streamed down Layla's face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to everything." Khalid slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her close for a kiss. Zain cheered and hugged them both, while the hidden musicians began to play. Sarah appeared with champagne for the adults and sparkling juice for Zain. As they toasted, more guests emerged from the villa. James, Victor, fully recovered from his wounds, the Minister of Justice and his wife, all the people who had helped bring their family together. "I have something else to show you," Khalid said, leading them to a table covered in architectural plans. "Karim's final gift to us, a house in the mountains, away from everything, a place where Zain can run free, where we can be together without the world intruding." Layla studied the plans, recognizing the location. "The place you told me about, where you spent summers as boys?" "Yes." Karim never forgot those happy times. He wanted Zain to have the same memories. "Can we go there now?" Zain asked excitedly. "Can we see it?" "Soon, Habibi." Khalid ruffled his son's hair. "First, we have a wedding to plan, and I think your mother might want a say in how our mountain home looks." The celebration lasted well into the night. Zain fell asleep in a chair, clutching a piece of wedding cake. Sarah covered him with a blanket, while his parents danced under the stars. "Are you happy?" Khalid asked softly, holding Layla close. "More than I ever dreamed possible." She touched the ring on her finger. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. That we'll be running again, hiding." "Never again," he promised. "The Chen network is finished. Helena will spend the rest of her life in prison. Thanks to Karim's evidence, all their allies are being brought to justice." She laid her head on his shoulder. "I wish he could be here. Your brother. I wish he could see how happy Zain is, how much we love him. He knows." Khalid looked up at the stars. Somewhere he knows. Later, as the guests departed and the lights began to dim, the little family stood together at the edge of their island paradise. Zain, half asleep between them, held both their hands. "Tell me the story again," he murmured. "About how you found us." Khalid picked up his son, cradling him close. "Once upon a time, there was a very rich man who had everything money could buy, but his heart was empty. Because he lost his true love," Zain continued sleepily. "That's right, but then one day, by a miracle, he found her again. And not only did he get back the woman he loved, but he discovered he had the greatest treasure of all. A son," Zain whispered, drifting off to sleep. Layla wrapped her arms around them both, her ring catching the last of the fairy. Lights! Above them, a shooting star streaked across the desert sky, a final blessing from those watching over them. They had lost 7 years, but they had gained a lifetime, and in the end, love had won. Not the simple love of fairy tales, but The complex, messy, beautiful love of real life. The kind that survives separation, betrayal and loss, only to emerge stronger. In his sleep, Zayn smiled, safe in his father's arms, his mother's kiss on his forehead. The desert wind carried the scent of roses and new beginnings, while the stars kept watch over the family that had found its way home at last.